Today I'm going to tell you a story that will touch every fiber of your heart. It's about a woman who was humiliated in the worst possible way, thrown out like trash, but who came back years later in a way nobody expected. And you know what's crazier? She came back with his son, that millionaire man who pretended she never existed. Chapter 1. The Unlikely Encounter. When two lives from different worlds crossed, nobody could have imagined that an ordinary Friday night would forever change the destiny of two such different people. She was just another waitress struggling to pay the bills, serving expensive champagne to people who would never know her name. But when that man in an impeccable suit walked into the restaurant, something in the air changed. You know that feeling when the universe is plotting something? That was exactly it. Their eyes met for only 3 seconds, but it was enough to ignite a spark that all the money in the world couldn't extinguish. It was the kind of connection you only see in impossible love stories, the ones that seem like movie scripts, but that happen in real life when we least expect them. He wasn't like the other rich customers who treated employees like furniture. There was a sadness in his eyes, a loneliness that money couldn't cure. You know that type of person. As she took his order, her hands trembled for no apparent reason, and he noticed. "Are you okay?" he asked with a voice that mixed genuine concern and curiosity. She almost dropped the tray, because nobody inside there ever asked if she was okay. It was strange, it was unexpected, it was the beginning of something that could be breathtaking or absolutely tragic. In that instant, without knowing it, the two had just taken the first step toward a love story that would test all limits. What neither of them knew is that 30-second conversation was just the beginning of a whirlwind. In the following days, he returned to the restaurant. Once, twice, 3 times in the same week. Her colleagues began to notice, whispering in corners about the millionaire who always requested the same table. "He's into you," they said, with that tone of people who know that long-distance love between social classes never ends well. But she didn't want to believe it, couldn't afford to dream of something so forbidden. Still, every time he smiled at her, her heart raced in a dangerous way, the kind we know will hurt later. And that's exactly when everything started to get really complicated. Chapter 2. The Forbidden Passion, the love that defied social barriers. The 4th time he showed up at the restaurant, he didn't order food. He asked for her number. Her heart beat so hard that she swore everyone there could hear it. "I can't," she whispered, looking around as if someone would report her for daring to dream too high. But he didn't give up. And for the first time in her life, she felt what it was like to be truly seen, not as the poor waitress, but as a woman who deserved to be desired. When she finally gave in and wrote the number on a crumpled napkin, she had no idea she was signing a contract with destiny. It was that kind of decision we make in seconds, but that echoes throughout our entire life. You know when you feel like you're jumping off a cliff without knowing if there's water below. The messages started timid, almost childish, but in a few days they turned into calls that lasted hours. He talked about the pressure from his family, about how he was tired of living a life of appearances, trapped in a world where true love was replaced by contracts and conveniences. She, in turn, shared her secret dreams, though she never dared to speak out loud. "You make me feel free," he confessed one early morning, and she felt her chest tighten in a way that was both heartwarming and scary. It was a soulmate connection, the kind you read about in old love letters and don't believe still exists. But it existed, it was happening, and it was absolutely forbidden. The first meeting outside the restaurant was arranged with all the care of someone planning a crime. He couldn't be seen with her. The family, the business, the reputation, everything was at stake. They met in a distant park where nobody knew them, and when they finally stood face to face without the barrier of the restaurant table, the world seemed to stop. "This is crazy," she said, but was already holding his hand. The best craziness of my life," he replied, and there, under some random tree, they sealed an impossible pact. It was the kind of exciting love story born from the unexpected, fueled by the adrenaline of the forbidden and seasoned with the innocence of those who believe that love can overcome anything. Little did they know that the universe was preparing a plot twist that would change everything. Chapter 3. The night that changed everything. The intimate moment that sealed their destinies. 3 months of secret meetings, deleted messages, and well-intentioned lies led them to that night. He had rented a small, discreet apartment, far from the curious eyes of high society, a refuge where they could be just two people in love without heavy last names or bank accounts dictating each person's worth. When she entered that space for the first time, she felt a mixture of nervousness and hope. It was as if they were building a parallel world where true love could exist without judgment. "This is ours," he said, lighting candles that made everything more poetic, more real. She had never felt so desired, so seen, so absolutely alive. It was the kind of moment you keep in memory like a treasure, because you know it's rare, special, unforgettable. That night, between nervous laughter and whispered confessions, they crossed the line that separates dream from reality. It wasn't just physical, it was a complete surrender, a silent declaration of love that needed no words. He held her face like someone holding something fragile and precious, and she allowed herself to believe, for the first time, that perhaps that impossible love story could have a happy ending. "I love you," he confessed in the middle of the night, and she felt her heart explode in a way that was both heartwarming and frightening. It was the kind of love people spend their entire lives searching for, but that few are lucky or unlucky and enough to find. In that moment, they were invincible, or at least that's what they wanted to believe. What neither of them realized is that that night wasn't just about love. It was about consequences. In the following weeks, while they continued their secret meetings, something was being gestated, not only in her body, but in both their destinies. He began to talk about a future together, about how he might be able to face the family, about how their love was strong enough to overcome any obstacle. She wanted to believe, but deep down, she knew that people like her didn't end up with people like him. Life had already taught her that in ways too brutal. Still, she clung to that hope like someone clinging to a plank in the middle of the ocean, and then, one ordinary morning, everything began to crumble in a way she could never have predicted. Chapter 4. The Devastating Discovery. When she realized she was carrying a secret, the delay came accompanied by a feeling she tried to ignore for days. At first, she convinced herself it was just stress, the restaurant rush, the sleepless nights thinking about him. But when she bought the pharmacy test with trembling hands and saw those 2 lines appear, the entire world collapsed and rebuilt itself at the same time. Pregnant. She was pregnant with a man who belonged to a completely different universe from hers. She sat on the cold bathroom floor and cried, not from sadness, but that confused cry of someone who doesn't know if they just received a blessing or a curse. It was the kind of news that changes everything, that transforms a love story into something much bigger, much more real, much scarier. For an entire week, she kept the secret like someone keeping a bomb about to explode. Every time she looked in the mirror, she saw a different woman, no longer the dreamy waitress, but a future mother who needed to make impossible decisions. "How am I going to tell him?" she thought, while serving tables and faking normalcy. Her mind wouldn't stop. Would he be happy? Would he take responsibility? Or would he run away like so many other rich men do when fun turns into responsibility? The fear of losing the love of her life competed with the fear of raising a child alone, and this internal battle was destroying her. It was captivating and tragic at the same time, that moment suspended between dream and nightmare. Finally, on a night of borrowed courage, she scheduled a meeting and decided to tell him. She rehearsed 1,000 times in front of the mirror, tried to find the right words to transform a shock into joy. When she arrived at their secret apartment, he was radiant, talking about a trip he wanted to take with her, about plans and dreams. "I need to tell you something," she interrupted, and her voice came out more trembling than intended. He held her hands, smiling with that confidence of someone who still believes love solves everything. "I'm pregnant," she blurted out, and saw his smile freeze, his face change, his eyes blink, trying to process. The silence that followed lasted only seconds, but seemed like an eternity. And it was in that silence that she realized nothing would ever be the same again. Chapter 5. The Public Humiliation. The day his family kicked her out, without mercy. His initial reaction was shock, but then came something she wanted to interpret as acceptance. "We'll figure this out," he said, but his voice didn't have the same certainty as before. In the following days, he disappeared, not completely, but enough for her to feel the ice forming between them. The messages got shorter, the meetings rarer, and that horrible feeling of abandonment began to settle in her chest. When he finally reappeared, he brought news that broke her heart into 1,000 pieces. "My family found out about us. They want to meet you." At first it seemed hopeful, even redemptive. Maybe there was a second chance at love. Maybe the family would accept. But naivety has a price, and she was about to pay dearly for believing in happy endings. The meeting was scheduled at his family's mansion, a place so imposing that she felt tiny even before entering. His mother received her with a smile that was pure poison disguised as politeness. "So you're the waitress," she said, each word dripping contempt. The father didn't even bother to disguise it, looking at her like someone looks at something dirty that needs to be removed. He was there, but silent, standing in a corner like a pathetic statue, unable to defend the love he swore was eternal. "How much do you want to disappear?" the mother asked, putting an envelope on the table with the naturalness of someone buying vegetables at the market. In that moment, she understood that it had never been a true love story for that family. She was just a problem to be solved with money. The words that followed were so cruel that she would still hear them echoing for years. "Did you really think my son would marry someone like you? A waitress with no future, no family, nothing?" The humiliation was poignant, breathable, suffocating. She looked at him, silently begging for a word, a gesture, anything that showed their love had meant something. But he remained silent, cowardly, small. "Get out of my house," the mother ordered, and when she stood up with wobbly legs and shattered dignity, nobody stopped her. She descended those marble stairs alone, pregnant, humiliated, and completely destroyed. The pain was triumphant in its cruelty, the kind that marks the soul forever. And as she walked down the street not knowing where to go, a certainty was born inside her. If nobody would fight for her, she would fight for herself and for the child she was carrying. Chapter 6. Alone and Pregnant. The silent struggle of an abandoned mother. The first months were the darkest of her life. She lost her job at the restaurant. After all, pregnant and emotionally devastated, she could no longer fake smiles for demanding customers. The money ran out quickly, and she found herself having to choose between paying rent or eating properly. Her belly grew, and with it also grew a different kind of love, a fierce and protective love she didn't even know existed inside her. "It's going to be just you and me against the world," she whispered while caressing her belly on sleepless nights. It was touching and desperate at the same time, that mixture of unconditional love with absolute terror of the future. She had become one of those warrior women we see from afar and think, how does she do it? But when you're inside the story, it's not heroism, it's pure survival. She moved to a simpler neighborhood, sharing a tiny little room with a colleague who agreed to help her out of pity. She got odd jobs here and there, cleaning houses, selling sweets, anything that kept her and the baby alive. Each day was a battle, each night a fight against the temptation to give up. Sometimes she would pass by the restaurant where she had worked and remember when life was just difficult, not impossible. She never heard from him again. The man who swore eternal love simply evaporated, as if she and the child had never existed. The anger she felt was the kind that burns inside, but she learned to transform it into fuel. He will regret it, she promised herself, while scrubbing yet another floor. It wasn't about revenge. It was about proof, proving she was worth more than that family thought. The prenatal appointments were done at the local health clinic, where she waited hours in endless lines. She saw other pregnant women accompanied by husbands, mothers, entire families, and the loneliness hurt like a stab. But every time she heard the little heartbeat on the ultrasound, she found strength she didn't know she had. The doctor once asked if the father would come to the delivery, and she answered with a firmness that surprised even herself. Don't need a coward father, need a strong mother, and that's what my son will have. It was a declaration of love and war at the same time. The last months of pregnancy were an emotional roller coaster, fear of childbirth, anxiety about the future, but also a stubborn hope that everything would work out somehow. And it was this hope, however crazy it seemed, that kept her standing when everything conspired to bring her down. Chapter 7. The Birth of the Miracle. When she swore to give her son everything she never had labor, started on a cold early morning. And she had to take 2 buses to the public hospital because she didn't have money for a taxi. Each contraction was a painful reminder that she was doing this alone. But it was also proof that she was stronger than she imagined. She checked into the maternity ward without a companion, without flowers, without a camera to record the moment, just her and that baby fighting together to come into the world. The nurses looked at her with pity, but she didn't want pity. She just wanted it to be over and for her son to be born healthy. After hours of pain that seemed endless, she finally heard the most beautiful cry she had ever heard in her life. "It's a boy," they said, and when they placed that small, perfect being in her arms, the entire world made sense in an unexpected way. Looking at that little face, she saw his features, the eyes, the shape of the nose, and for a second felt the pain of absence. But soon that pain was swallowed by a love so giant, so overwhelming, that it didn't fit inside her chest. "You'll have everything," she promised with tears streaming. "Everything I didn't have, everything you deserve." She didn't have money, didn't have her own house, didn't have support, but had enough determination to move mountains. There, in that hospital bed with worn sheets and peeling walls, not only a baby was born, but a new version of her, stronger, fiercer, more determined. It was an inspiring and heartbreaking moment at the same time, because all she wanted was to share that joy with someone, but all she had was herself, and it needed to be enough. The first days at home were chaotic. Sleepless nights, diapers, crying, despair, exhaustion. But every time she looked at her son, she found reasons to continue. She named him Miguel, which means, "who is like God," because she wanted him to grow up knowing he was special, unique, loved above all. The neighborhood people helped as they could. One brought used clothes, another gave cans of milk. And she learned that family isn't just blood, it's who stays when everything falls apart. On one of those difficult nights, holding Miguel in her arms while he slept, she made a silent but powerful oath. "I will succeed in life, not for me, but for you. You will never feel the absence I felt, will never be embarrassed, will never bow your head to anyone." It was a promise of healing through love, a decision that would change everything. And from there, every decision she would make would be thinking of that boy who deserved the entire world. Chapter 8. Years of Sacrifice. The transformation of a broken woman into a warrior. The following years were a true marathon of sacrifices. She worked during the day at a store, at night did cleaning jobs, and in the early mornings studied online using an old cell phone and the neighbor's internet. She slept 3-4 hours a night at most, but never complained. She didn't have time for self-pity when she had a son depending on her. Miguel grew healthy and cheerful, completely unaware of the battles his mother fought to give him a minimally decent life. She didn't tell him about his father, not yet. How to explain to a child that his father had money but preferred to pretend he didn't exist? It was too harsh a truth, one of those we keep until the right moment. Meanwhile, she transformed every no that life gave into a "I'll prove you wrong." The turning point came when she discovered free vocational courses and decided to specialize in digital marketing. She spent early mornings learning about social media, online sales, strategies that seemed from another world. People laughed. Digital marketing, you who barely have a good phone. But she didn't care about the skeptics. She had learned that the greatest revenge against those who humiliate you is your own success, and was willing to prove it. She started small, doing freelance work for little shops in the neighborhood, then for larger companies, and built a reputation. The money was still tight, but no longer desperate. She managed to rent an apartment just for them, small but dignified, where Miguel could have his own room. It was an unexpected success, built brick by brick, sacrifice by sacrifice. 5 years after that humiliating night at the mansion, she was no longer the same person. She had become a respected entrepreneur with a small digital agency that was growing. She lost weight after months working out at home with YouTube videos, not out of vanity, but because she needed to feel that she at least controlled her own body when everything else seemed chaotic. Miguel entered a good school, not on a pity scholarship, but because she could pay. She bought her first car, used but hers, and cried at the wheel because she remembered when she had to walk hours in the rain. The transformation was epic, the kind that inspires, that shows it's possible, yes, to rise from the ashes. But a part of her, that part that never completely healed, still held the pain of rejection and the secret desire that someday, somehow, he would know what he had lost. Chapter 9. The Unexpected Success. How she built her own empire from scratch. 8 years after being kicked out of that mansion like trash, she was sitting in a penthouse she had bought with her own sweat. The digital agency had exploded, from freelance work in the neighborhood to contracts with national companies. It was a leap that even she had difficulty believing. She had a team of 15 people, an office in the city center, and revenue that would make most people from the neighborhood where she grew up faint with surprise. Miguel, now 8 years old, studied at one of the best private schools in the city, took swimming, English, and had everything she never had. "Mom, when I grow up, I'll buy a bigger house for you," he said once, and she laughed with tears in her eyes. "Son, the house is already ours." It was a triumphant moment of pure pride, living proof that true love and determination overcome any obstacle. But success had a bittersweet taste. Every time she looked at Miguel and saw his eyes, an exact copy of his father's eyes, she felt a tightness in her chest. He asked about his father sometimes, and she diverted the subject with mastery, but knew that one day she would have to tell the truth. "Your father couldn't be with us," was the standard answer, vague enough not to hurt. The wound of rejection had healed but left an ugly scar, the kind that hurts on rainy days. She had dated other men over the years, but never let anything get serious. She had fear, distrust, that terrible certainty that love only brings pain in the end. She focused all energy on work and her son, building an emotional and financial empire where nobody could ever humiliate her again. It was her armor, her fortress, her way of saying, "You were wrong about me." The definitive turning point came when she received an invitation to an entrepreneurship award ceremony in the city. Her agency was among the most innovative of the year, and she would be honored. She bought a beautiful dress, not because she needed to impress anyone, but because she wanted to celebrate with herself. On the night of the event, when going up on stage to receive the award, she looked at the audience full of important business people and felt something powerful. She was no longer the invisible waitress. She was someone who deserved to be there. She gave a speech about overcoming, about single mothers, about transforming pain into purpose, and received a standing ovation. It was heartwarming and unforgettable. But the universe loves incredible coincidences, and while she descended from the stage radiant, she had no idea that among those hundreds of people in the audience was precisely him, the man who had destroyed and, unknowingly, rebuilt her life. Chapter 10. The inevitable reunion. When the past knocked at the door, years later, it was as if time had stopped when their eyes met. He looked different, older, with grey strands at his temples, and that air of someone carrying heavy regrets. She, on the other hand, was unrecognizable from being so transformed, elegant, confident, radiating success. For a second, she thought about looking away and pretending she didn't see him, but something inside her, pride perhaps, or need for closure, made her stay still. He approached with hesitant steps, like someone approaching a ghost. "Is that you?" he asked with a choked voice, and she responded with a smile that was more armor than joy. "Yes, it's me." The air between them was loaded with everything that wasn't said in that mansion years ago, with all the love that turned to ashes, with all the hatred she cultivated and then buried. He tried to make conversation, stuttering, poorly rehearsed apologies about how he had thought about her over the years, about how he had been a coward, about how the family pressured him. Each word came out more pathetic than the last, and she watched it with a mix of satisfaction and nausea. "You look amazing," he said, and there was genuine admiration there, but also something that seemed like envy or regret. "Thank you," she responded coldly, without giving space for intimacy. He asked if she'd gotten married, if she had children, and she felt her heart race. That was the moment, the bomb about to explode. "I have a son." "Yes," she responded, measuring each word, observing his reaction. He smiled that smile of someone who doesn't understand anything. "Congratulations. I'm sure he's a lucky father." The irony was so absurd she almost laughed in his face. Before she could think better, the words came out, "His father doesn't know he exists." She saw the confusion on his face, the attempt to process, and then decided to end the torture. "His father kicked me out of the house pregnant, preferred the family's approval over the child who was on the way." His eyes widened, his face paled, and she saw the exact moment when it clicked. "No, it can't be," he stammered, and she confirmed with a nod. His world crumbled right there in the middle of that fancy party, surrounded by important people. "I have a son?" he asked in shock, and she responded with brutal calm. "You had a son. He has a mother, and that was always enough." It was the fiercest declaration of love she could make, not to the man before her, but to the boy she raised alone. And while he tried to process the bomb that had just fallen on his perfect and empty life, she felt something like redemption. Chapter 11. The shock of truth. The moment he discovered about his son. In the weeks following the unexpected reunion, he didn't leave her alone. Calls, messages, emails, a pathetic desperation of someone who woke up too late to their own life. He wanted to meet his son, wanted to do the right thing, wanted forgiveness. She read each message with an almost clinical detachment, without anger, without pain, just a deep tiredness of someone who had already cried everything they had to cry. "Why now?" she asked on one of the few times she answered. "And because I was a coward," he admitted, "because I let fear and pressure destroy the only real thing I ever had in my life." The words were beautiful, even touching, but she had learned that words don't pay for diapers. Don't wake up at dawn when the child has a fever. Don't hold his hand on the first day of school. Words were cheap, and he had wasted the chance to do more than talk. But he didn't give up, and that, in a way, was surprising. He discovered that the arranged marriage the family had forced hadn't worked out. He divorced 2 years later, without children. He had built even more wealth, expanded the family business, but lived in an eloquent loneliness that money couldn't fill. "Unda, you don't understand," he begged one afternoon when he managed to meet her personally. "I spent 8 years with a hole in my chest, knowing I had been weak when I needed to be strong." She interrupted him. "And I spent 8 years being strong when I wanted to be weak. The difference is I didn't have a choice." The truth hurt, was poignant, but needed to be said. He asked, on his knees right there in the cafe where they talked, for a chance to meet his son. "Not for me," he said, "but for him. Every boy deserves to know who his father is." That last phrase touched her in an unexpected way. Because deep down, no matter how strong she had been, she always feared that Miguel would grow up with that wound of not having a father, with those questions she couldn't answer. Maybe it was time to let the boy decide, to give him the chance she never had, the chance to have a complete family, even if strange and broken. "Nay, if I allow this," she began with a firm voice, "it will be on my terms. Miguel doesn't know who you are, and won't know until I decide he's ready. You won't appear in his life like a hero and destroy the reality I built. You will earn the right to be a father, if you still know what that means." He agreed with everything, desperate, and in that moment she realized something liberating. She was no longer doing this for him or for her, but for her son. It was about giving Miguel the second chance at love she never had, about healing wounds across generations, and perhaps, just perhaps, about forgiveness, not his, but her own, for still caring. Chapter 12. The Final Redemption. The Outcome. Nobody expected. The first time Miguel met his father was in a park, in a casual meeting carefully orchestrated by her. "This is a friend of Mommy's," she introduced, and watched with a tight heart while the two interacted. Miguel, always communicative, began to talk about school, about swimming, about his dreams of being an engineer. He listened to every word like someone listening to a miracle, with eyes shining with barely contained emotion. The resemblance between the two was too obvious. Same eyes, same smile, same way of gesturing when excited. Several times she saw him hold back tears, and despite all the anger she had stored, she felt a pang of compassion. It was impossible not to see that this was being transformative for both father and son, even without the boy knowing the whole truth yet. The meetings became routine over the months. He was patient, respectful, never crossed the limits she imposed. He showed up when he promised, called when he said he would call, brought simple but thoughtful gifts. Gradually, she saw something she didn't expect to see. She saw him become what he should have been from the beginning. And Miguel was happy, happier than she had seen him in a long time, with that male figure present, attentive, genuinely interested. It was on one of those afternoons, watching the two playing ball and laughing, that she realized that healing through love was happening for everyone. For the boy who finally had a father, for the man who learned too late the value of fatherhood, and for her who was learning that forgiving isn't about forgetting, but about freeing yourself. 6 months after the reunion, she finally told Miguel the truth. She sat with him and explained, with all the honesty an 8-year-old child could absorb, who that friend of Mommy's was. "Is he my real father?" Miguel asked with those wide eyes, and she confirmed. "Why wasn't he here before?" was the next question, the most difficult. "Because he made a very big mistake and took a very long time to have the courage to fix it," she answered, without lying but also without destroying. To her surprise, Miguel wasn't angry. He was curious, even excited, with the idea of finally having a father. That night, the three of them had dinner together for the first time, a strange and imperfect family. But real. It wasn't a fairy tale happy ending, because real life doesn't work like that, but it was a new beginning, a second chance for everyone to make fewer mistakes and love more. And while she watched Miguel laugh between her and his father, she thought that maybe, just maybe, some love stories need to break completely to rebuild themselves stronger. It was unforgettable. It was hopeful. It was the kind of destiny and love that nobody can predict, but that everyone deserves to live. So, what did you think of this story? Seriously, stop and think with me. How many times do we give up when life hits hard? How many times do we let humiliation, rejection, and pain define who we are? This woman had every reason in the world to give up, to become bitter, to spend the rest of her life lamenting what could have been. But she chose differently. She transformed every tear into fuel, every no into motivation, every scar into a lesson. And you know what's most incredible? She didn't do it for revenge. She did it for love. Love for her son. Self-love. Love for the life she could still build. Now I want to hear from you. Which part of this story touched you the most? Was it the brutal humiliation at the mansion, the silent sacrifice of raising a child alone? Or was it that epic reunion, when he discovered he had wasted the chance to be a father? Comment down below, because I love reading your stories too. And look, if you're going through a similar situation, if you're feeling that the world rejected you, that you're not good enough, that nobody believes in you, this story is proof that you can turn it around. It won't be easy, it won't be fast, but it's possible. Success is the best revenge, and self-love is the best cure. Now do me a favor. If this story touched your heart, if it inspired you, if it made you feel something real, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Every week I bring moving stories like this, stories of overcoming, of true love, of real people who faced the impossible and won. You won't want to miss any, I promise. And go ahead and share this video with someone who needs to hear that you can start over, that it's never too late for redemption, that love, when it's true, always finds a way. Until the next story, and remember, you are much stronger than you imagine.